The question is that this bill will be now read a second time. I call the member for Denison.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I have a number of concerns with the Social Services and Other Legislation Amendment Bill, one of which is the diversity of the bill. I think it would be more appropriate when there are a number of controversial issues to be decided in this place. It would be more appropriate to split them into separate bills. I spoke yesterday at some length about my concerns with the current government's attack on the tertiary sector, on the universities. So I won't repeat those comments that I made in this place yesterday, but I would like to associate them with this bill as well. Today I will use my limited time to focus on another area of great concern to me and a focus of the bill, which is this government's determination to wind back the modest poker machine reforms of the 43rd Parliament. Why the new government would do this, frankly, Deputy Speaker, escapes me. The scope of the poker machine problem in this country is by now well remarked upon, and at least one thing this government will not be able to destroy is that we have shone a light in the 43rd Parliament on the issue of poker machine problem gambling. We've helped to take away a little bit of the stigma of it. More people are now seeking help, and in fact poker machine revenue nationally is down markedly, and that's a positive step and not something that the new government can overturn. But just to recap, the 2010 Productivity Commission report into gambling in this country, the second major report by the Commission, revealed a number of quite dramatic statistics. For example, that something like 95,000 Australians have a problem with poker machines. They lose much more than they can afford to lose. And that 95,000 people are losing between them something like $5,000 million a year on the pokies. From other places we have learned that, from other sources we've learned that something like 15% of Australians that gamble weekly have a gambling problem, and that something like another 15% of people who gamble weekly on the pokies are at risk of becoming problem gamblers. In other words, almost a third of the people who are playing the pokies weekly either have a serious problem or at risk of developing a serious problem with the machines. Some good research out of Tasmania, Deputy Speaker, is that for every problem gambler with the pokies, between 5 and 10 people are affected. Mums, dads, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, work colleagues, people they manage in the workplace, their boss, friends, any number of people. So in fact, when you add all this up, the number of people that are adversely affected by poker machines in Australia is well over 1 million. Surely more than enough people for any government, to be determined to take strong and decisive action and finally to do something about it. And the human face of this, Deputy Speaker, are remarkable for those of us who are involved in this issue. And I would like to think every member of Parliament would sit down from time to time with people who are concerned with the scourge of poker machines, would sit down with people who are affected by poker machines, would listen to their stories, would hear at least some of the stories that I have heard as an outspoken advocate for reform. For example, the people who have gone to jail. Good research out of Victoria, Deputy Speaker, shows that problem gambling, predominantly from the pokies, is the second most prevalent cause of crime in that state, second only to drug abuse. Stories like the family I learned of in my own electorate some time ago, who finally, after repeated attempts by Aurora to put them on repayment plans, finally had their power cut off. What became of that family? What became of those children? What did they do for a hot meal? What did they do for a hot shower? What did they do for lights at night? No doubt those children would be some of the children that take advantage of the public school breakfast programs that need to occur in my electorate and in any number of electorates. Stories like the couple introduced themselves to me some time ago who'd been bankrupted by a dishonest employee, an employee that had taken so much money out of the till over years that ultimately it was the main reason for that business going broke, for the owners to be bankrupted and to lose everything. Eventually, I'm pleased to report they did get back on their feet. The stories of the suicides. it is unsurprising that the incidence or the rate of suicides among problem gamblers is markedly higher than in the rest of the community. You know, there's 1,000 stories. I could stand here, Deputy Speaker, all day and all tonight, and I wouldn't run out of stories to tell, and some of them would sound very familiar to some people in this place. So why? Why, when the problem is so big? Why, when the problem affects so many people so brutally? Why would this government want to overturn the modest reforms of the 43rd Parliament? It really does escape me. It's not like you don't have public opinion on your side. Poker machine reform being such a hot topic in the 43rd Parliament, it prompted a number of researchers and media outlets to commission a number of polls. And the polls consistently showed over time, right around the country, a clear majority of Australians want strong and decisive poker machine reform. If anything is remarkable, it's that there wasn't stronger reform in the 43rd Parliament, and now surprising that the new government, Deputy Speaker, wants to wind back even those modest reforms of the 43rd Parliament. Deputy Speaker, I almost got myself in a bit of strife yesterday by seeking to ask a question of the Prime Minister, and the gist of it was that how is it that so many avowed Christians can seem so uncaring when it comes to gambling reform? I think it was a fair question to ask, and if I could sort of pitch it more as a statement now in a slightly different way, how is it that people who claim to be compassionate, to claim that they stand up for a fair deal, a fair go to help the battler, how can they be so uncaring when it comes to gambling reform in this country? Deputy Speaker, how can people who came into this chamber this morning and bowed their heads and joined in the Lord's Prayer, how can they then, when it comes to gambling reform, be so uncaring? What would Jesus Christ have to say if he was walking the earth, if he was sitting in this chamber now? What would he say, Deputy Speaker? What would he have to say about poker machines in Australia? What would he do if he was in this place? I'm sure he would take a much more compassionate approach. I'm sure he would not be party to a move to overturn the modest poker machine reforms of the 43rd Parliament. Frankly, Deputy Speaker, I find all of the piousness, the sanctimonious behaviour, the hand-wringing, the bowed heads, I find so much of that sometimes so hypocritical when those people then turn around and are not prepared to take strong, decisive action to help so many Australians, often the most disadvantaged people, some of the lowest paid people in the land. I note that the Prime Minister yesterday, Deputy Speaker, recommitted the opposition, the government, I should say, to voluntary pre-commitment, working collaboratively with the states to put in place a voluntary pre-commitment around the land. The problem with that approach, Deputy Speaker, is that there is an abundance of research which shows unambiguously that voluntary pre-commitment does not work. You know, the government is very quick to criticise me and to say my push for mandatory pre-commitment, or the push by many people, including myself, for $1 maximum bets on poker machines. The government is very quick to say, oh, it doesn't work, there's no research. Well, that's baloney, Deputy Speaker. There's an abundance of research to show that $1 maximum bets, that mandatory pre-commitment where people must set a limit, a binding limit, and the system locks them out for the rest of the day when they reach that limit. There's an abundance of evidence to show that that works. Just as there is an abundance of evidence to show that the government's course of action of voluntary pre-commitment only, an abundance of evidence to show that does not work. And in fact, the crucial part of the 43rd Parliament's reform, which this government is not wanting to shine a light on and say too much about, the critical thing that this government is overturning is Section 33 out of the Act from the 43rd Parliament, which requires the voluntary pre-commitment system to, in essence, be capable of mandatory pre-commitment at the flick of the switch. This government knows, the industry knows, that that was the crucial part of the reforms of the previous Parliament, because by rolling out a voluntary system that's capable of mandatory at the flick of a switch, it would then be the option of a future federal, state or territory government to flick the switch and the industry then would have no excuses about won't work or too expensive. That's really at the heart of what this government is overturning, to ensure that machines in the future will not be capable of mandatory pre-commitment. So, mindful of that, this government's apparent, well, it's a genuine interest, I'm sure, in voluntary pre-commitment. It's actually an interest in a completely worthless technology, a completely worthless reform. This government knows that unless the systems in the future is made to be mandatory pre-commitment or mandatory pre-commitment ready, which is what the Act does require, that's the crucial part of reform. Deputy Speaker, one of the problems is that too many people in this place have been bought off by the poker machine industry. A player within the poker machine industry handing over $100,000, a couple of $100,000, $1 million over time, yes, it's a political donation, yes, it's declared, yes, it sort of seems clean with our regulatory framework. But quite frankly, Deputy Speaker, by my standards, by my moral framework, that is every bit a corruption of good governance as a bag full of cash being passed over at the back of the building one dark night. In the few months after the 2010 federal election, the Australian Hotels Association and Clubs New South Wales donated $1.3 million to the Labor and Liberal parties, most of it, in fact, to the Liberal Party. There was no altruism about that. It wasn't a generous gift to help a buddy out. It was an investment which today is it's paying dividends. No one hands over. Jamie Packer, when he handed over a couple of $100,000 to Katter's Australia Party when this parliament was considering poker machine reforms, no one hands over that sort of money without an expectation, an unsaid demand for a return on that investment. Well, it seems the industry's made some pretty good investments, and we're seeing it being returned today by the determination of this new government to overturn the very modest poker machine reforms of the 43rd Parliament. Deputy Speaker, I won't mince my words. The poker machine industry is every bit as fundamentally cruel and corrupt as anything you can imagine. It lives off the misery of problem gamblers. $5 billion out of the $9 billion lost in this country comes from problem gamblers. It's the cream on the top. It's the big fat profit the industry makes. The industry figures it can't afford not to have problem gamblers. And it's like a Ponzi scheme, because as people take their own lives or lose all their money, or perhaps fortunately get over their gambling problem, as people come out one end, the monster has to be fed. It's a Ponzi scheme. The poker machine industry needs to recruit new problem gamblers every day, keep feeding the monster. That's the only way the poker machine industry continues to function. No wonder the industry makes machines that are so addictive. The founder of Aristocrat, a big Australian company, makes poker machines, exports them globally. The founder of Aristocrat once said that the secret of Aristocrat's success was it learned to make a better mousetrap. Doesn't that give the game away for what the industry's up to? Just as when the former head of the Clubs New South Wales in 2009, when talking about political fundraising, said, and I quote, "There was absolutely the view that supporting fundraising, political fundraising, helped our ability to influence people. We did support political party fundraising, which was a legitimate activity, and it certainly assisted us in gaining access." Well, hasn't it helped to gain access today? The fact that this new government is so determined to overturn the modest poker machine reforms of the 43rd Parliament. I can only hope that when this goes to the Senate and the next Senate, there will be enough people of goodwill up there to stop this part of this bill. People like Family First, the DLP, Nick Xenophon and others, enough people of good heart, maybe Palmer's United Party will also stand in the way. Because I tell you what, the onus is now on the Senate to stop this. This is a cruel and ill-considered part of the bill by the new government. And it's a completely meaningless gesture when it comes to a pursuit of voluntary pre-commitment, which will not work. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.